Hey, beautiful. Hope you're having a really great day. Thanks for popping in and being here with me, Rose Stein with Rose Stein Coaching. Today is the perfect time to talk about something that a lot of my clients are obsessed with. And sometimes you don't even really realize how you are thinking until someone stops and asks you a couple of questions, right? Until you pause and take a moment to consider, I like to call it questioning authority, right? The authority of the mind. And it's so wild because once we begin to really understand that the mind is doing its job, it's doing a really good job, and it is designed to not only protect us, but to remind us of the past. And it reminds us over and over and over and over and over again as like, hey, that's my job and that's what I'm going to do. And if you would like to take ownership of your mind and your thinking and direct your thinking in a particular way, that takes some energy and it takes some effort and it takes some intention. And one of the things that I found that a lot of women struggle with is time. There is this obsession with time, this time distortion where it's like, oh, it's not the right time, or when it's a better time, or why do I have to eat well all the time? Right? There is this belief that somehow time is going to do something, that it's going to take time to get something done, or take time to find the energy, or take time to find the motivation, or take time and even wasting time. Right? Like, how many of us have thought, oh my goodness, like, look at that person over there. We started that diet together a year ago, and look, she's looking great and feeling great. And I wasted all of that time. Or whatever. There's just a million ways in which we can begin to think about time in a sad and destructive way instead of an inspiring and an uplifting way. And if you're stuck in that rut where you're waiting for the perfect time, or you're judging yourself for the time that you've wasted, or you're wondering why it just has to take so long to do certain things, I'm going to teach you a little mind trick right now to begin to take ownership of time and your perception of time and the way that you're thinking about things, and begin to speed things up. One of the most powerful questions that a mentor of mine asked me, she said, Rose, how are you keeping this alive? I came to her with some issues and some resentments and some frustration, and I was working on that kind of stuff spiritually. And one of the things she asked me is, how are you keeping this alive? And I began to think of a client that I had many years ago, and she had had some frustration with a sister of hers, I think it was. And I remember us sitting there, and it kept coming up, and it was a source of emotional eating for her. And so it kept coming up, and she just was like, well, it's just going to take time. We've been through this before. It's going to take time. And I said, okay, well, about how much time? And she said, well, it usually takes a year for something like of this magnitude to really kind of resolve itself, and so that we can rebuild our relationship. I said, well, that's certainly a long period of time to be emotional eating and feeling upset and having this kind of like disjointed relationship with food. Like, is that what you want? And she said, well, no, but like, what can I do about it? And I said, well, okay, let's question authority here a little bit, right? Let's dive in a little bit. And I said, well, what is it that is different in a year than now? Like, what does the time do? And I said, where does this frustration live for you? And she said, well, when I think about it, when I think about my sister and what she did to me, it's right here in front of me. And I asked her how, in terms of like space of her thought life, like, where was it? And it was like right in front of her. I asked her if it was in color or black and white. And she said color. I said, is there sound to it? And she said, yeah, I can hear her voice, and it's very annoying to me. And I said, okay, very interesting, right? Because as human beings, we perceive the world through our senses. And so even in our mind and in our imagination, our interpretation of the events are typically represented in our senses. So we notice color, we notice sound, we notice movement, we notice space, right? How big things are and where they are. Like, obviously, if something's right here in front of you and it's in color and it's loud, it's like Dolby surround sound, obviously it's going to grab a lot more of your attention and create those feelings that are representative of the thoughts that you're having about this thing right in front of you. Totally different than if it's way over here behind you, in the distance, black and white and kind of muted and dull. It's not that it's not there anymore. You just have placed it in a different space. And she sat and she thought about it for a minute. She was like, that's exactly what happens over time. Over time, other things come in and they begin to become, and kind of move the other stuff out. That's what happens over time. And other things become more important. Other things are placed in front and they're louder. And those things that happened months ago or years ago begin to get softer and they go more behind you. And what's really cool is that you don't have to wait any amount of time to take ownership and control and be intentional with your thinking. You can take those images and fade the color. You can take the sound and drown it out. You can wash the color away. You can take the picture and you can shrink it. And you can place it then behind you or over in the corner or up on a shelf, right? Especially if you kind of are not sure if you want to let it go yet. Right? It's a good idea if you want to place it on a shelf and go, okay, brain, like I know that you're there. If I want to come back to you and be upset about this thing again, I can grab it off the shelf and put it right in front of me and make the sound bold. But for now, I'm going to place it over here. And we do these sorts of things naturally over time, but people who are really successful at taking responsibility and responding to their own abilities to take control of their own mind. It's not that they don't have negative things that happen and things that frustrate them. They're just very intentional about what they do with that information. And they question themselves and they say, how am I keeping this alive? Am I keeping the sound in there? Am I keeping the color in there? And I'm keeping it big and right in front of me. And they might not use those exact words. I mean, obviously this is like talking about grief, and there's like the stages of grief. Talking about the stages of grief is not the same as experiencing it. And you don't need to know the stages to have gone through it. Same thing, but it can be very helpful as a framework as we begin to understand and we begin to utilize and learn tools and strategies to think the way that we want to think. Because quite frankly, grew up and we were all told what to think, but not how to think, how the brain actually works and processes information. And some of us are intuitive about that kind of stuff and just do it naturally. And others of us struggle real hard. And we really need to be taught what's going on here. That's not something that just comes naturally. So if time is of essence, if time is of issue for you, if you find yourself relating to things in terms of not having enough time or wasting time or waiting for the right time, or why does this happen all the time, or whatever, that kind of stuff, I really encourage you to utilize the technique that I just shared with you. Watch this video over a couple of different times and really realize how much power you actually have over your own mood, your attitude, your relationship with food and your body, the emotional eating, especially if it's emotional eating, because man, those emotions can feel really big. And quite frankly, again, that's one of the things that binging does, sugar flour binging. Like it takes that picture and that intensity of the emotion and it shoves it aside. And all of a sudden, now the thing that we're thinking about and focused on is the food and eating less or enjoying it or being really focused on that. So we're pushing that aside in favor for something else that is brighter and more in our face. So, I mean, obviously it works, but most of us, obviously, if you're in this group, you've gotten to a point where you're like, that was cool for a while, but I need to learn some new strategies, right? Like, I don't want to just continuously struggle with my weight. Like this is not fun anymore, right? So if it's not fun anymore and you want to take responsibility for your emotions and really learn that emotional sobriety, this is one of the techniques that you can use. I love you so much. I hope you're having a really wonderful day and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.